shoot, I need lip gloss. Look at me not wearing just a gloss. Look at me wearing color on my lips. All right, you guys, I'm super excited for today's video. It is going to be my first update in my Pan That palette. If you guys don't know, this is my first year doing a Pan That palette. I really felt like I needed to do a Pan That palette so that I could round out my panning experience, you know? Oops, we want both shoulders showing today. There we go. The palette that I am working on is the Abh Sultry palette, and I will say I'm proud of how many times I used this palette this month, but looking at like the progress on each shade, I'm literally terrified for the rest of the year. So if you guys are interested in my update on my Pan That palette for 2022, 2023, good lord, we are never going back to 2022. Stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. I haven't decided how I want to like structure my updates either. So if there's something that like I leave out today that you are wanting to see, or whatever, just let me know in the comments, because I have not yet decided how I want to do my updates. I didn't take B-roll footage of this palette when I did my introduction, but I did take some today. So I'll have like B-roll footage for like last update versus this update for the next update. But I do have pictures, so I will post those on the screen. So here is what my palette looked like when I rolled this in. As you can see, I already had 4 pans on this palette, and some decent progress. This was probably one of my most loved, not probably, this was one of my most loved palettes within my collection, my goodness, what am I saying today? And this is what my palette is looking like today. So hopefully you'll be able to see there was some really good usage. There's definitely some changes within this palette, which I'm super excited about. We do have a new pan to discuss. But there's also some shades that I'm like, ugh, they're making me a wee bit nervous. I will say my goal within this palette is not to finish every single shade in its entirety, but just to see how much I truly can do in a year. And then pending where we're at, I will likely declutter this palette no matter what at the end of 2023. So just putting that out there. That is my current plan with this palette. I did use this palette, reached into this palette for at least one shade or more at 23 times in the month of January, which I am super proud of and very happy with. And so now we will go shade by shade and I will discuss with you how many times I use each shadow. So starting with the first shade, which is the shade Fresh, I reached for this shade 22 total times this past month, and I'm hopeful that you can see a ton of progress within this shade. I'm thinking it'll still take probably 1.5 to 2 more months to completely finish up this shade, but I feel like I'm well on my way to an empty shade there. Next to that, we have the shade Pearl, which I reached for 11 total times. I mostly use this shade as an inner corner highlight. I believe I used it all over the lid one time this past month, but I do see some expansion in that pan and we're making progress there. This is another shade I feel like I should be able to actually finish by the end of the year. Moving on to Steampunk, I did only reach for this shade 2 total times, and I feel like you're not going to be able to see, you know, much of a difference at all, maybe a little bit of a disturbance, but really no progress there. This is a shade, this is probably one of my least favorite shades within the entire palette. I just think it's more golden than I typically tend to reach for, so I do think I'm going to struggle with this shade, but I am hopeful to at least hit a pan. Like, I would love to hit pan. I need to hit pan in every single shade within this palette before the end of the year. Moving on to Rose Quartz, I did reach for Rose Quartz 10 total times. I feel like I reached for this more than 10 times, but 10 is the number. I am thinking you'll be able to see a dip in Rose Quartz, a little bit of a difference from the last update. And I am hopeful that I could potentially have a pan on this shade by the next update. It'll be close. I do feel like this palette is one of those where I feel like I'm close to pan, and then it takes like 5 to 6 more uses after I think I'm about to hit pan in order for me to actually hit pan. So hoping that Rose Quartz, you know, if not next update, for sure the update after that. Next to rose quartz, we have the shade Ember, which I reached for 4 total times. This isn't my favorite shade in the palette, but I have used this on the outer like third of my eye to kind of deepen looks up with, and I think, you know, I'll make this work. I can make this work. We're gonna get use out of it. This won't be the most difficult by any means, but it's not my favorite shade in the palette. Next to that, we have the shade Bloom, which is going to be a challenge. So I did reach for Bloom 3 total times. Once I used it as an eyeshadow and twice I used it as a blush. And I actually think I'm really going to enjoy this shade as a blush in the summertime. It definitely has that sunburnt sort of vibe. And I think that's how I'm gonna get quite a bit of my use on this. This is definitely not a shade I reach for when I'm creating looks within this palette really. So I do think that Bloom is gonna pose a challenge to me, but I did test out using it as a blush and I did not mind that at all. Next up, we have our first pan that I've hit in this palette this year, and that is the shade Birch. I reached for Birch 16 total times, and I feel like I have a good pan there now. This was one that I had a dip for quite a while, and I felt like I was gonna hit pan, and then finally one day I did hit pan. This is a shade that I really enjoy and find very easy to reach for in this palette, and I reach for this just about every single time I'm creating a look from this palette. So hopeful that this will be an empty shade. I'm wondering if I could also get use out of this as a bronzer if I really wanted to, you know, try and expedite my usage on this shade, but that's where we're at with Birch. Moving on to the bottom row, we have the shade Cinder. I reached for Cinder 3 total times. I feel like I should have and could have reached for Cinder more, but I was a little bit more focused on rose quartz. I do really enjoy the shade Cinder, and I think I'll have fun with this throughout the year, so I'm not concerned about that, but you'll likely just see a little disturbance in that pan and not a whole lot of progress there. Then we have Twig. I reached for Twig only 3 times. I did already have a pan in Twig, and I'm not sure if the pan has expanded. I feel like maybe it's expanded just ever so slightly. Twig was the first shadow within this palette that I hit pan on, and I don't like Twig as much as I remember liking it in the past. I feel like it's too ashy, and it just isn't a favorite anymore, but we are going to continue to truck along and get use on that shade. Next up, we have the shade Teak, which I reached for 6 total times, and I do feel like I have a good dip and disturbance going on in this pan, or in this, yeah, within this pan at this point in time. I'm excited about my progress on Teak, and I'm hopeful that I could potentially have a pan on Teak next update as well. I've really been enjoying this on the outer, like 2/3 of the lid, or even all over the lid, and I think I could have a lot of fun with this shade. I'm hopeful that this will be one of the shades that I totally finish off by the end of the year. I just never know with the shimmer shadows. I feel like they're easier to hit pan on, but in terms of like actually using it up, I don't know. Next to that, we have Dystopian, and Dystopian I reached for 10 total times. So I ended up hitting pan in Dystopian. Like when I hit pan, it was because I was using this as a brow powder. And last year I really got away from using a brow powder in my eyebrows. And so I decided to start using a brow powder in my brows again. And that is where my use for Dystopian came. I think I used it once on my actual lids as opposed to my brows. So I do feel like this shade is getting, it's a little dry. It doesn't apply as buttery and smooth as it used to. And part of that could be that it has a bit of hard pan just from using it in my brows. I'm curious, I don't know. I haven't compared side by side last year's photo to, or not last year's, last month's photo to this month's. You guys will see it or have already seen it on screen before I'll actually compare in like live in real life. I think there might be a little bit of change within Dystopian, but not much at all. I'm a little bit worried about getting this one totally used up, but we'll see. I'm happy that I got 10 total uses. It's just using it in the brows I'm not using much at a time. And I do find that the shade is a little bit dry and patchy when it applies to my actual lids now. So that's where we stand with that. And then the final 3 shades are the 3 that make me the most nervous. So we have Cyborg, which I reached for 1 time. I think there's a little bit of a disturbance here, but, and I think Cyborg is a beautiful shade. I just don't reach for shades like this that frequently. Next to that, we have the shade Slate, which I think will pose as the most challenging within this project. I reached for that 1 time as well. I never reach for grays. Grays are just not a shade that I reach for. So that shade does make me quite nervous. And then next to that we have Noir, which is the black shade, and I reached for that 2 total times. I think I will hit pan in this shade by using it as a liner, or just figuring out, you know, using it to tight line or go over my tight line, like my liquid tight line. I don't know. I'm gonna have to find a way to get use out of this. I just don't reach for a black that often. It is still super buttery and smooth though, so that's, you know, that's a plus. But that is where we stand with my usage on each shade within this palette. I did really want to start the year off with a bang, start out right, and reach for this palette just about every single time that I did my makeup. I do find this palette very easy to create, like, I'll call them work appropriate looks, or looks that I feel comfortable wearing to work, which is awesome. So I think I'll continue to get good use out of it. But I also feel like I almost exclusively reached for this palette this past month. I did reach for, I have it in front of me, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I actually did reach for 13 total palettes this month, but I felt like primarily my focus was this, and I was creating a lot of, you know, very similar looks because I was just using this palette almost every single day. So I do want to rotate through my palette collection a little bit more in February. I am feeling really inspired by pink looks for Valentine's Day, which is just a little bit like outside of the norm for me. Like typically pink shadows are just not what I enjoy. I like mauves, but in terms of like pink, that's not typically what I like get excited about, but I'm very excited about pinks right now. So my goal with this palette for this next month is, I saw one of you in the comments say for every like next month it is to try and get at least that many uses on each pan within the palette. So for January, 1 use per pan. For February, 2, like a minimum of 2 uses per pan. March, 3, etc., etc. And I am going to try to stick to that at least for the first half of the year. I feel like as we get to like the latter half of the year, I might be getting a little bit burnt out, and then it would be more uses. So I'm gonna at least try and implement that for the first half of this year, meaning I want to reach for each shade within this palette at least 2 times. I am hopeful that other goals for next update, I would love to have like this whole like bottom part and potentially the side part of Fresh cleared out. Like I feel like that would be a really good goal, if not have Fresh as an empty. I don't know that I'll quite be there as Fresh as an empty pan. Pearl, I would love to see this pan expand more as well, which I think is a very achievable goal. Like I would like to reach for Pearl at least 5 times. I reached for Pearl 11 times. This is a very easy inner corner highlight for me to use, and I do want to try and use it as like a actual highlight as well. I haven't tried that yet. Steampunk 2, that's gonna be the goal. I'm not focused on this one right now, and I'm just not feeling inspired by Steampunk at this moment. Rose quartz, I would love to have a pan on. I don't know if that's gonna happen. I'm like looking at the dip and I'm like, I just don't know if that's gonna happen. But rose quartz, this is, you know, it's February, pinks, time to reach for that shadow. So I would love if I could have a pan in rose quartz. Ember, no real specific goal except for the 2 uses. Same with Bloom. With Birch, I would love to obviously expand the pan. I would love to reach for Birch another like 10 times. I feel like that would be pretty reasonable. I reached for it 16 times last month. I think I could reach for this another 10 times. Cinder, maybe I would like to reach for this one like at least 5 times, but no real specific goal with that. With Twig, I would love to see if I could expand this pan just a little bit, but I don't know. I feel like this cool toned grayish browny taupey shade isn't necessarily going to go with a bunch of pink Valentine's looks, so not sure with that. Teak, I mean, if I could hit a pan on Teak by next update, that would be awesome. I do have a better dip going in Teak even than I do rose quartz, so we'll see there. Dystopian would love to at least reach for this 10 times again in my brows even, and see maybe a little bit of pan expansion. And then Cyborg, Slate, and Nior at least 2 times. So those are my goals with my Abh Sultry pan palette. I am excited about my progress in the first month. I feel like I can, like, I'm excited about it now, but I can see myself a few months from now getting that like pan that palette fatigue that everybody talks about, but it's been a fun experience so far. I would love to know in the comments below if you're currently working on a pan that palette, if you own the Sultry palette, if you have any ideas or any different ways that you think I could try and use like Cyborg, Slate, or Nior, or even Bloom, or even Steampunk. Give me all your ideas, because those are the ones I'm most nervous about. But I'm hoping I'll have at least one pan to share with you, one new pan to share next month. That is going to wrap it up for today's update. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch and for supporting my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.